Hey, MBA hopefuls. We are air with MBA Waves, your weekly podcast, talking all things business and education, streaming live every Tuesday on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. We bring you tons of tips to help you into a top-ranked MBA program and get you up and close and personal with many of these B schools that we host on the show, where you can get all your questions answered. And if you like this week's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today on episode 97, we're talking about a super hot topic, all things AI. In fact, we dive into the impact of AI, plagiarism in admissions, and of course, how can you use AI to your advantage? As always, I'm your host, Krithika Srinivasan, joined by my co-host, Eric Lucrezia of Candidate Coach, and Bara Sapir, Director of City Test Prep and Mindflow. How are you guys doing, Bara and Eric?
Good. I'm excited.
I would love to invite our guests to introduce themselves.
So, Gonzo, why don't you start?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Gonzalo Tudela, or Gonzo for short, and I am the co-founder and CEO at Examined AI. And what we do is we help university instructors assess their students anywhere in the world with a high degree of privacy and integrity.
Nice. And Brad, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah,
Also part of
absolutely.
Examined.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm one of the co-founders at Examined, but I was also a professor at IE Business School and taught in the MBA program there. And also before that, I taught in the MBA program at The Ohio State University.
Nice.
Welcome.
And also with us, we have a colleague and fellow admissions consultant, Pamela Jaffe.
Jaffe. Hi, my name is Pamela Jaffe. I'm founder and run the Jaffe Advantage, which is an admissions consulting firm. So very excited to hear from the experts on AI.
And you're in New York today, right?
I'm in New York, yes.
And Brad and Gonzo, where are you guys at right now?
Yeah, so I'm up near Niagara Falls, kind of just about 30 minutes from Buffalo, that kind of region.
And I'm in Utah.
Nice. All right, so we're all over the world. Great.
All right, so I would love.
Go ahead. Get started off
with one of the most important questions, I think. So we had calculators, then the internet, and now the next big threat is AI generated writing. So what do you think is the impact of AI on education?
And any of our guests can handle that, tackle that question in any order you like.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. I'll just start from a non-tech standpoint. I think it's going to be huge. I already hear about people using it in business. And that means that universities are going to have to prepare their students to use it. I spoke with a former candidate recently, and he said some professors are embracing it, some aren't. So I think it's TBD.
Yeah, I think there's a couple elements. So first, as with any technology, we have to look at it as it's an enablement, right? It's technology is the technology, but that's not really the message. The message is what is it enabling? What's it going to do? What's the power? I think that the impact on technology is it's going to be a compelling event for higher education to kind of rethink and modernize a bit as to where we're going. Because for long, we've kind of a little bit ignored how and what we do in work with things like closed book exams, and we're kind of missing the mark a little bit. So we're going to have to kind of modernize. And I think the second major impact is going to be really solving the Bloom's Two Sigma problem. So I think it was in the 70s or 80s. Bloom came up with Bloom's taxonomy, and also there was this paper that he wrote that those who can engage in one-on-one tutoring and mastery practice, aka practicing the knowledge that they've learned, will perform better than 98% of the class. And so when I mean solving the Bloom's Two Sigma problem, what I mean specifically is enabling that potential one-on-one tutoring at scale and enabling that high velocity of different practice to master your knowledge. I think that's going to be the secondary effect.
Are you guys all familiar with the Bloom's? What is it? The Bloom? I'm not. Where does that? Do you want to give a little background on that if you can?
Oh, for sure. So I mean, there's various, depending on who you talk to in instructional design, there's various ways to categorize the methods of understanding or learning. And so Bloom's taxonomy is like a pyramid that goes from do you remember something to understand, to apply and analyze, evaluate, and create. I think that's the order. I can't remember. But as you go up, the complexity required of your understanding of the knowledge and ability to apply or ability to compare and contrast topics, you must know more, understand more, and have learned more about the subject matter. So Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy of learning, really. And it's one of the standards that are out there. There's others. It tends to be the one I reference most because it's, when you have something that's 30 plus years old and it's still being talked about today, then it has some sticking power, right? Same thing with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that has some sticking powers. Now, psychologists say there's updated and better versions, but I think that it's still a good model and a good starting point.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and add there. One of the things we do at Examine is we go and talk to students and just say, hey, what's going on? How are students, approaching their exams? In our world, we're asking them how they're cheating. And so that's where AI comes in. And what we see already is students are already using this in the masses. A lot of students are using it for not only their exams, but just their day-to-day life. And so at Examine, we believe this is a pivotal moment in education where, professors and institutions need to adapt. We're already seeing students doing that. They're writing essays with it. They're writing cover letters. They're writing maybe admissions essays. And so it's a big deal. No question about it.
And just to echo that one conversation, that one topic, I mean, the speed at which ChatGPT has been adopted is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I mean, to give an example, like Facebook was a pretty viral sensation. It grew pretty quickly. It took 10 months to get to 1 million users. Twitter took 2 years. ChatGPT took 5 days. And,
I heard about that.
Yeah, and that's just 1 million. But like, 1 million's one thing. To reach 100 million is something different, right? So you think about like Spotify took 55 months to reach 100 million. Instagram took 30 months, I believe, 30 months. TikTok, super addictive, 9 months to reach 100 million users. ChatGPT took 2. Like we're talking about one of the fastest growing adoptions in history.
Wow. And I think it's not just ChatGPT, it's also the host of other AI tools and the AI so-called plugins that we have that can write copy for you. And from that to anything relating to marketing or anything else, and I was very fascinated to hear about some of these tools that can be used for even Bloomberg is like having its own AI host of tools for some of its proprietary data.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually did a proof of concept. Johnny created a ChatGPT plugin just for our own internal usage. And what we're able to do is just in plain language, analyze anything we wanted to in our data set. Like we were just like, hey, show us the average score, give us a score distribution, give us a chart, update the scoring. Like it's extremely powerful. And I think that the key is we can just change a little bit on the tone in terms of AI and talk about large language models or generative AI, right? Things that can generate. That's really the enablement. And OpenAI has been working at this for 7 years. I think what happened with ChatGPT, and it's kind of the catalyst, is that's when it crossed the chasm, right? That's when it started hitting mainstream. And now most people still say ChatGPT, even though GPT-4 is out and available, and you can work with APIs now. And it's significantly better, not a little bit, like significantly better.
Yeah, I've seen that in areas like in math calculations and in science and statistics. I've seen that the GPT-4 has made leaps and bounds. Whereas I think in GPT-3, it was already kind of quite good with more verbal, language stuff. But you guys at Examine, you've been around for a number of years already. Do you want to share a little bit about the origins and like what you guys do in a bit more detail?
Yeah, for sure. So the origins come down to when my wife and I went to Madrid, went to IE. That's where I met Brad. And she came home one day. Then we went there during the pandemic, just to give some context. And she came home and she said, I just don't know what to do. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, my whole class is cheating on their exams. And she opened up WhatsApp, showed me all the exam questions, the course hero check, Quizlet pages. And she said, I just don't want to cheat. And I said, okay, so why are we talking about this? Just don't cheat. She said, well, the MBA is curved. And if I don't cheat, it's going to affect my GPA. And if I don't get a high enough GPA to get an interview in management consulting or investment banking, that's our life and our householding potential for the rest of my career. And so it really hit home, and it's like, oh, okay, now it's interesting. Now let's take a look at this. And really it became one of those lovely moments where my wife and I grabbed a bottle of Spanish Barroca wine, and we got together and we had a chat. We said, what matters to us? What really does? And just to give context, like, my wife is kind of the Hermione in class. She puts up her hand, sits at the front of class, answers everything. Brad will laugh and say that. But it became a no-brainer for us. We said, let's just not worry about the grades and just focus on the learning. And if I could give one piece of advice to MBA students or anyone who enters into an MBA, it's do that. Forget about the grades. Everything sorts itself out. You know, she's an executive now, and you know that didn't take long. You'll sort yourself out after the university. But she ended up graduating valedictorian by not caring about the grades. And most people do. They get super wrapped up into this stuff. And she said, let's just forget about it. Why? Well, the rest of her class, and we estimated about 80 to 85% of the class was cheating on their exams. The reason why she became valedictorian is because the second half of the MBA was all application. And it was all more real world scenarios. It was using the knowledge you had just learned. And she just rose high and above the rest. So where Examined came in is that I had this itch I needed to scratch. Why was cheating so bad? Was it really just this class, or was it everywhere else? So what led to, you know, taking out a few students for beer after every exam, and led to meeting instructors like Brad and other instructors at 30 different universities, led to realizing that online proctoring is a terrible idea and a terrible solution for the space of assessments. I think it just doesn't work, and it's not good for people. So using kind of, you know, simple background of technology and always trying to ask the right problem, we set on a different journey than what most people do. And it's, instead of trying to stop, prevent, or detect cheating, we try to figure out how can we remove the value that cheating provides. And from that perspective, you know, we came up with Examined and have a totally different way of approaching assessment.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that there was basically two things that really triggered my interest in co-founding Examined. And the first is what Gonzo mentioned about the high levels of cheating. As a professor, we all know that the cheating takes place, but we don't care to admit how pervasive it really is. And once I learned just how bad it really was, that was really a catalyst for me to you know, do something about it, because it's not just in multiple choice exams or, you know, static exams, but at an MBA level, we often teach case studies and essays and require essays and things like that. And to learn that it's just as pervasive in those areas as well was a real eye opener for me. And then the second thing that I already alluded to was we really believe in going out and talking to students and instructors and ask them what was going on. And in some of these student interviews, I learned how bad the situation was for these students. And I felt horrible as an instructor. You know, I often refer to my students as my kids, right? And I was just devastated to see how, you know, how devastating this situation was for students of choosing between cheating or not cheating, or they have anxiety and they have to deal with a camera and lockdown browsers. And so I thought, we got to do something better here. So that's how I jumped in after I met Gonzo.
That's such a fascinating origin story, I should say. You know, born out of the need to not prevent cheating, but like more from, you know, from the means of promoting learning. You know, in that vein, plagiarism has been defined as copying text or ideas and in the past plagiarized from humans. So what do you think AI would mean for academic honesty and plagiarism?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take a bit of this one. So I'm a big fan of, you know, first principles thinking, right? And I think there's a quote from Albert Einstein that was something along the lines of, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I knew the proper question, I could have the problem solved in less than 5 minutes. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I think that when you really think about innovation, you can't take it from analogy and then reasoning. You have to bring it down to its first principles. And Elon Musk is famous for showing this with things like SpaceX, right? Basically saying like from a first principles perspective of physics, we should be able to land a rocket. And everyone's like, that's crazy. He's like, well, here we go, we did it. So of course it was his team. But so coming back to this, and I say, well, what is plagiarism? So if plagiarism is using someone else's work or using tools to help you in your work of creating content, then the whole world plagiarizes every day in work, all the time, constantly. You go to Twitter, that's pure plagiarism every single day, right? If I didn't retweet and I just copied something else, that's plagiarism. So there's a really big problem in higher ed with regards to plagiarism and the way we look at the problem. And I think that there are two elements to that. So firstly is, if the world is doing this, is this really the model we should be using? Should we be looking at plagiarism and like stopping people? Well, the root cause of that is because we have not been able to distinguish between writing and critical thinking. It's been writing, the essay itself has been a proxy for critical thinking in higher education. And it is a great way to teach critical thinking. But what's happening with large language models and generative AI, specifically where we're talking about today, like what we understand as ChatGPT and stuff like that, because there's a lot of other stuff, is that writing is decoupling from critical thinking, right? Just like mathematics was decoupling from the work being done by a calculator. I know that's an analogy. I said I shouldn't use analogies, but that's one element. Now the question is whether or not AI can get into critical thinking and logic and reasoning, which it is already showing. So maybe it is not going to decouple and it will be the same. So the first problem is that we need to find new ways to think critically with regards to plagiarism. The second problem, and this is another root problem, the reason we need plagiarism detection, or the industry always asks for it, is because we only have one measurement of a student's final report. They send in the essay, we only look at the final. We have no indication of what's being used to create said essay. And this comes in a huge problem when you think about admissions. Admissions usually has a standard essay that you're going to put in, or you're going to put together this, package, right? So how much of it was plagiarized or not? I mean, you can't detect plagiarism, which, by the way, plagiarism detection is a futile effort. It will not work in the long run. You've heard it from me. So
why?
Technical reasons I'm not going to get into. I'll get to that in a second. Let me just finish this one piece.
All right.
So the root issue is we only measure the final essay, which means the natural next move for assessment in higher ed and admissions is to measure the progress it took to create said essay. So instead of having an unlimited time and submit your essay by the deadline, what we might start to see is you have a fixed time window of X, 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever, and you must do everything in this platform. Therefore, we can measure all the things you did and what you were trying to do to create said essay. Oh, by the way, here's ChatGPT and you can use it to help you. Why? Because you can gain so much more insight to how a student or a person thinks by how they use AI, how they prompt it, how they work with it, and how they take said information and finish their essay, right? I don't think like testing whether or not someone has good grammatic abilities is worth any time and salt anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not there. So my perspective on higher ed and where assessment is going, and with plagiarism, is that I think that plagiarism detection is futile, and we're going to move more towards measuring student progress instead of the final output of a student. And I think that critical thinking and writing is going to start to detach. We might get to see more scenarios, more applications in assessment, that kind of stuff. And so why is AI plagiarism detection a futile effort? So it's the same reason why I think online proctoring was a futile effort. When you think about online proctoring, if you make the AI detection or your flagging events more sensitive, the more false positives you will have. And therefore, less professors will actually review the results or act on them. Why? Because in a 150-person exam that lasts 1 hour, I have 9 hours of review work, which is unsustainable, right? You make it less sensitive to detect, someone's cheating or not. And what happens? Well, you get less false negatives. And in fact, people just get away with it. So it's totally ineffective online proctoring. When you think about AI plagiarism detection, it's the better AI becomes, the more human-like and accurate it will become, which means all I have to do is say, write it in the style of Ernest Hemingway, write it in the style of Hunter S. Thompson, change the style. And I've already done this a few times, and I've shown people we work with, GPT-0 doesn't work, OpenAI maybe gets 20% correct. It's a futile effort. And that is with ChatGPT. Now GPT-4 is even better and stronger. What about GPT-5 and so on and so forth? The other thing is you might make a really good detection for one of the models. What happens if a student uses a different model that you don't know about or that Turnitin hasn't modeled against? And that's why I think that plagiarism detection is just not going to happen and work. And the only solution, the only thing is to measure the progress it took to make the essay, not just the final essay itself.
I want to, oh, sorry, Pam. I just want to jump in real quick, which is super interesting because we've had ETS folks online and we've been talking about the new GMAT that it's not going to have an essay as part of the process. And when we brought it up with the ETS folks, they're like, it's saying exactly what you were saying, that we really actually need to have a designated time where people are writing and we can see in that real time how people are producing their work. Now, granted, they're not seeing the progress the way that you're talking about it, but it's interesting that GMAC has totally gotten rid of the essay portion of their exam. And so maybe they'll go into a direction of video, maybe they'll go into other direction, but it is super interesting. I mean, ETS, when we had them on, they thought it was a really interesting / bad idea. Remember that, guys? Remember they came on board and they were saying that?
Yeah, I think the only way to go through this is you have to reason back at the first principles, at the root issue, the right questions, and kind of build your case up from there. And I think that what we're taking up is absolutely correct. Like some people are going to agree and they're going to think like analogies, and some people are not. And I do believe that that we're going to enter an era of experimentation where higher ed cross disciplines are going to realize this affects everyone. It's not just physics or it's not just English. It's like every faculty, and they're going to experiment. And we'll see a slew of papers. We've just released one with IE, funny enough, about how we incorporated ChatGPT into an examination. So students could opt in to using ChatGPT to answer their multiple choice questions. And if they did, the question would change relative to what the result was from ChatGPT to a different question. And so that was a form of adaptive testing that removed the value of a student using ChatGPT to cheat on their exams, right? And so that's the perspective. That's where we're going to have to go. Right?
What was the end result?
It was fantastic. It was fantastic. Of course it was fantastic. We did it. No,
of course.
I'm just joking. No. So what it was we had 112 students in a control and 108 students with the ChatGPT exam, and the score distributions were near identical. The class averages were off by, I think, 0.8%. It was very close. Standard deviations were pretty much near identical. But that's because what we did is we did a weighted scoring. So what does that mean? That means if you did choose to use the ChatGPT question, you could only score partial marks because the next question was, AB, right? So if you had a probability of guessing on A, B, C, D, it's 1 in 4. It's a 25% chance. The second question was a 50% chance at getting 50% of the points. So it remained that weighted probability of failure. And so by doing so, by designing an assessment and designing a scoring mechanism that weights towards the critical thinking, we were able to get near exact results. So we were very happy with it. We actually have a paper. I can post it somewhere.
Yeah, definitely post that. Did you ask the participants prior to their participation if they felt that they were equipped with the knowledge that the exam was going to require of them?
So I'm not sure what I understand what you mean.
Well, meaning that if you gave them an exam and someone's using AI, then they might not start out knowing any information about what the exam is about, versus if someone knew something about the exam. Like, I'm just wondering how you qualified the two different groups and what their knowledge was.
Fantastic. So high level, this was a live master's in management exam for operations and logistics. And the professor, Daniel Corsten, is a tenured professor at IE. So he delivered the same exam with what we call dynamic questions, which we're not going to open that can of worms today, in his class in a previous semester. And then so the same content, just new variants of those questions were delivered to these students. And what we did, let me just read it, is we basically read this prior to their examination. We said, today your exam will have something new that you may not have seen before. You will have the option to have AI answer some of your questions in your exam for you. If available, there will be a yellow button at the top right of the question that says Get AI Answer. If you choose to use the AI, then you won't be able to score full points on that question, only partial points. The system will tell you how many points you can score before you confirm to use the AI. So this is entirely opt-in, okay? Once you confirm that you want to use the AI, you will then, your question will then ask you a simple yes or no question onto whether or not the AI response is correct in its entirety. For anyone who does not want to use this feature, just go through your exam that you normally would any other exam. So there's really like no major difference if you didn't want to use it. The only way to score 100% on this exam is not to use the AI feature. The choice is entirely up to you, and your score will reflect your decisions throughout the exam. As a reminder, closed book, yada, yada, yada. So the concept here really is it's a form of adaptive testing. And really our whole hypothesis was, what's the moment when a student needs help? It's when they're in that exam and they can't quite remember how to approach a problem. And they don't want, they're literally going to guess. So what value is it to have students guess when they don't know? Versus at least here, we provide them maybe a right, maybe a wrong explanation, but at least a bearing as to where you need to start thinking. And that moment when they need it most is where we're setting and reinforcing it. And then that next piece is now you have to force them to think critically. Is this correct or is this incorrect? And to really, that's a totally different thing than just applying the problem. That's another layer. That's up the Bloom's taxonomy level, which the results for students absolutely just loved it.
I feel like there was a game show that did something like, wasn't it like Get a Lifeline, and then you can call someone up.
Who wants to call a millionaire? Or no,
right?
Who wants to be a millionaire?
Right.
Who wants to call?
Right. That's like,
yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting because it's so true. Someone might be like completely confident in the answer that they give the contestant, but do you know? Like, do you really know if that information is correct or not? And then you have to use your critical thinking to see if you're going to take their input or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add to that real quick. I think one of the really important lessons that we learned from this study was that students that used it sparingly, only in those moments where they really needed help, so like 1 to 2 times, they scored above average. But those students that didn't, above the average of the students that didn't use it at all. But those students that relied on AI excessively, so they used it more than 3 times, they actually scored below average and performed poorly. So you can't just rely on AI to get through the exam. You still have to know the material. So it was a fascinating outcome that really highlighted that we can leverage AI tools to enhance learning outcomes.
I want to do this for a physics test. I haven't taken physics since high school. I want to do this for something that I haven't looked at, but it's probably something in the deep recesses of my mind, and see if I'm able to bring it back up to the forefront. You know, something, I think that would be super interesting. I'll have to, there's an app for that, right? I need to figure that out. Can you
ping me after, because one of the things that we're doing right now, it launches this week, is when a professor imports an existing assessment from their LMS, like you can import a Word document if you want, we will automatically try and solve the problem and provide a detailed explanation to said problem, right? And so you could put in your various questions from physics, try it out and see how well you score, or how well the AI is scoring. And that whole idea is to help professors build their explanations into the system, which could help for students later on, and also do this ChatGPT question. So yeah, I'm happy to let you play with it.
Oh, that sounds like fun. I mean, the interesting thing for those of us who are in the test prep world is that, and I don't even know if I agree that it's 10,000 hours and it becomes like a second nature thing, but I've certainly done more than 10,000 hours of test prep on multiple tests. there are times when I don't even need to like read a reading comprehension or read the body of the text that the question's asking about. And I usually get it down to 2 answers, and I often get it correct. Just because there's things happening in the answer choices that are just so nuanced that I understand how a bad answer sounds or how a good answer sounds. So, being a professional test taker, it'll be super interesting to do something that's not in my field of comfort, right? Like physics or calculus, or something that I've had a brush with, or maybe something astronomy. I haven't had a brush with astronomy. That would be a great thing for me to try.
Here's a fascinating question. So do you think that that's your ability to reverse engineer the test's design, aka the questions design, and not the material being tested?
I think that the material being tested on standardized tests is often not what's being tested actually, but it's the critical thinking and reasoning. So it's really employing it's really getting myself out of the way and teaching my students to get themselves out of the way to really understand. It's not quite reverse engineering, but it's really entering a space where knowledge, content, skills, and trust come together. If that makes sense to you. It's really, you can use, like, obviously, yeah, you need to know certain equations to answer certain questions. Like, you need to understand how many degrees are in a triangle. So you're using some logic in there, but it's also really understanding what they're testing and reasoning, MacGyvering it, right? Not always, but, and I don't know if all the listeners are going to know who MacGyver is, but I've been using MacGyver as a sample on MBA Waves a lot. But Krithika, what do you think about this in terms of approaching a test and being intimate with question sets versus content?
I would say it also depends on how you're preparing. And of course, the content of the test. In terms of it, and when it specifically comes to like something like the GMAT or the GRE, like you said, Bara, I think it's also the approach of and the kind of techniques that you would use in order to arrive at the answer, like how even Gonzo was mentioning about, probably like where I would ask for help versus like how I use the tool, right? Those things. Yeah. Pam, what do you think?
But can you hear me? It just says, okay. So first of all, I have sort of 3 things I wanted to mention, more in terms of admissions essays than anything else. First of all, I thought it was really interesting what Gonzalo said about how maybe admissions is going to change to seeing your work and more timed work. Because as an admissions coach, 80% of what I do is working on candidates and the insights. How do I connect something from your childhood to how that's changed who you are today, to how that's influenced your work and your personal life? It's not the essay itself, it's the insights that I'm helping them derive. So that is the complicated part. It's not the writing. So when you now make a candidate do that in a time scenario or on a test, I think that's going to be very interesting. So that's one thing. Second of all, I know we've talked a lot about cheating, but I do think there's an underlying assumption here, and maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but everyone wants to cheat. Because for the longest time, there's been what's called ethics and admissions consulting, right? There are consultants out there who will write your application for you. And a lot of candidates will struggle to, they'll work with me, and it takes a lot longer to write an essay with me than is going to with somebody who writes the essay for you. But somehow they know that it's better not to do that because it's not the right thing. And finally, I just want to say that while I do think AI is the future, and I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in AI, and I do think we are going to need to embrace it, I would not recommend that any candidate applying in the fall use it, because I've actually tried to write essays on it, and it is not there yet. It does not pull those detailed insights that you need to be able to explain to Kellogg your values or stand for what matters most to you. It's just not there yet. And it's those little things and connecting the dots that gets you into these schools. So those are my quick 3 points. I do think it will be there in the future, but not in the next month.
Pam, not only is it not there yet, but there's also the risk of getting caught, in which case
Absolutely.
Your integrity as an applicant or a future student, if you're discovered to have cheated, you could be removed, no questions from consideration or from the school. But I think it's also it's very much disenfranchising for the applicant as well, because that journey of figuring out who you are, where you've been, like you said, coming up with those insights of what has shaped you today, the person you are today, and how you see this particular program, because you believe that it's the right fit for you, is going to connect you to the future version of yourself. And if you just bypass that process, an essay is almost like journaling or meditating. It's something you go through, and it's a journey. And why would you do that to yourself? Like, you very likely could end up at a school that isn't the right fit for you, even if you may have successfully persuaded the school that it is. So,
exactly. Adding on to that, I've actually had one of the most rewarding compliments I get from candidates is not only did I get into the school, but you've actually made me think critically about what I really want to do. I came into this process thinking this, and now I think that. And that was not the outcome that they were looking for necessarily, but that is the outcome that they have. And ChatGPT is not going to get there. Now,
we've often compared this process of like,
what?
I cut you off. I didn't mean to. Go ahead, Pam.
No. I'm saying is I do think we need to keep watching this, because I do think that there are going to be ways, as Gonzalo said, to use it in a positive manner. But I certainly don't think it should be seen as an essay writing tool, because it's not a process about an essay. It's a process about thought.
Yeah.
I want to check with the Examine folks here, because they say that these large language models like the ChatGPT, they produce original text, so technically it's not plagiarized. So even the essays that come out, I don't think those get detected, would they?
Sorry, the essays that come out, sorry?
Essays that come out of, say, ChatGPT or anything that uses the large language models, they're not necessarily plagiarized, right? Because they're original content, right, or original text.
So we have to come up with a new word to describe what is happening now, right? It's not technically plagiarism if that is defined by copying from someone else. It is some kind of like robot plagiarism. I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe you have an idea, Gonzo or Brad.
It's sort of like somebody writing your essays for you. As we all know, there's consultants that write your essays for you. They're not plagiarizing. They're just writing them. That's what ChatGPT is doing.
Yeah, but then the student or the applicant copies that and puts it into his or her application. So
isn't that the same with ChatGPT?
Well,
yeah, I guess I'll ask this same question back to you, and then you tell me if you think this is plagiarism or if this is just using a tool. When Microsoft releases Copilot inside Microsoft Word, and it allows you to, just like Gmail, finish your sentence, instead you could generate a paragraph or finish off your create a whole outline for your essay within Microsoft Word. Is it plagiarism or is it using the tool? And I actually put that question back to you and say, what is it if Microsoft's doing it and it's a part of Microsoft Word?
See, I would say any kind of predictive text that we're also used to is like the small tiny entry into the realm of
baby steps into
tapping into some kind of collective knowledge, and kind of like we left our intelligence a little behind for that, I would say. So I would say that
an interesting point there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the concept of plagiarism is going to have to change. Right? The whole, not just the root description or definition, but how we handle it is going to have to change. I don't know what it's going to change into. I have some ideas. One idea is, instead of plagiarism being a 0 on your paper, maybe it's a weighting factor. Right? The less you originally wrote or the less you worked with weighs it down instead of just gives it 0 on the grading rubric.
But how to determine how much they used it? It's almost like like a weighted average. If you were in an honors program, you would get your final grade weighted up because you were in a more challenging program. This would be like a down weight.
Yeah, and so this is all research that has to happen. And so, as an example, like, would you rather? Like, here's a question: when it comes down to it, like, you're getting your MBA so you can get a better job, and you want to be in a better employee. Like, an employer is looking for you, and so this piece of paper carries a lot of weight. This credential carries weight. And so the question for then is, like, who would you rather hire? Would you hire the person who wrote their essay entirely by themselves and took 4 hours to do it? Would you hire the person who had an entirely plagiarized, whether it was hired someone else to do it or ChatGPT wrote it? Or do you want the person who spent an hour constructing incredibly insightful, critical thinking prompts and got the same job done in an hour? And so my question is, isn't that critical thinking? They were insightful, they were working on it. And so when I say measuring students' progress, I believe we give the tool inside of the platform and allow students to use it and create analytics around what is critical thinking. And it's like, wow, those prompts, that iterative prompt was someone really discovering how to get something out of this. And that's how they write. I personally, terrible writer. I sit there, I'm in writer's block. I have no grammar. And it's partly because I didn't learn how to read till grade 4. But the issue is, does that mean I can't think critically and I can't connect dots and I'm not someone who can't create a company? No, it doesn't mean any of that.
So obviously,
So
working in AI, you're working in AI, you're going to be embracing this more, and I definitely see that side to the argument. I think there's, first of all, at least in the world, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, my colleagues here at MBA Waves, from business schools, it's kind of been radio silence. Like top schools have not necessarily taken a strong position because I think they're waiting to see how things play out and they don't want to end up on the wrong side of history. So it's been kind of quiet, letting see how things go. Also, I've seen a lot of reactionary kind of fear-driven behavior in the New York City public school system, in the Seattle school system, in even here in Paris at Sciences Po, which is one of the top institutions for political science here in France. It's flat out bans. And talking to some of my friends in education who are actually professors and so forth, I just, was some spitballing about this topic. And I thought if I was teaching a class, rather than pretend it doesn't exist or forbid it, I would encourage my students to try it out, see what it comes up with, and then put them to the task of correcting it or commenting on it. Because in a way, ChatGPT is doing what our students do anyway. I mean, ChatGPT looks at the wealth of information on the internet and summarizes it into a neat little package without sources. Maybe one problem, but
Bing will give you sources.
Oh, there you go. Well, see what our students do. They take a class for a semester. Let's say it's, British literature, right? And then you learn a bunch of stuff by reading books, from discussion in class, perhaps watching videos. And then you're expected to write an essay to summarize what you've gleaned from all of this in your own words. So it is like a taking what's out there and restating it kind of tool. And maybe the idea of using it to get you started and then fixing it, tweaking it, correcting it, making it your own is the way to approach it, because like the tools are there and they're going to just get better and better. So shouldn't we teach our students to use the newest tools in a way? This is the argument. This is the conversation or the debate.
I want to throw this in because I'm just realizing that when I was a professor of fine arts, I gave an assignment that was, I wanted them to replicate something. I wanted them to create like 7 drawings a day for a week. And I didn't say draw. I just said, I'd love to have this image and just, come back and in a week, and we're going to look at what you actually produced. Some of the students painstakingly drew, let's say, a sunflower seed, right? Whereas others got friends to draw sunflower seeds. And then some of them went to a Xerox machine and just Xeroxed the sunflower seed. And so it's actually really similar to what you're talking about here in the range of the critical thinking, because the people that Xeroxed it or got their friends, I gave them the same score as someone who painstakingly created these gorgeous images, because they had actually, they had a problem that I gave them, and how were they going to respond to it, right? Like it's very similar to what, I mean, it's many years now, but I mean, it's the same thing. And I think it's also interesting, what happens when someone plagiarizes, we don't have a term for it yet, a ChatGPT like document? Like what happens when it becomes removed multiple times? I mean, does it become Fox News? I mean, what happens?
It's a Xerox of a Xerox. And for those of you who don't know what a Xerox is, it's a photocopy. You're right. That was years ago, Bara.
Raging all of us.
Yes.
So, Gonzalo, question for you. One of the things as a consultant that I do is trying to get candidates to think of things they haven't talked about for 20 years and see how that might have formed them. Do you think not ChatGPT, but the next iteration of AI is going to be able to brainstorm with the candidate, right? It's not a one-sided thing. It's a back and forth. Oh, you did this. That's interesting. What did you learn from this? How does it relate to that? Do you think we'll get to the point where the AI can do that and not turn it into an essay, but get them to take nonlinear information and make it linear?
So the answer is yes, and GPT-4 is already capable of this. The challenge with doing some of these things really comes down to instruction of the AI. So a lot of people are talking about on Twitter and LinkedIn, they share their prompts, but that's the superficial high level piece. That's the accessible side. The other side is fine tuning a model. That is saying, okay, in this scenario, I want you to do this. In this scenario, I want you to do this. And it's kind of giving it a data set so that you can increase its capabilities in a specific, more narrow niche. So if you take a look at something like what Khan Academy is doing with their one-on-one tutor, they've effectively trained GPT-4 to be a Socrative instructor. In other words, they'll give you a problem and they'll say, okay, great. How would you solve this problem? And ask the student in a one-on-one chat, how would you solve this problem? And the student would say, well, I don't know. Just give me the answer. And they go, no. Come on, give it another try. I don't know. Kind of like a tutor would go and say, okay, well, let's start by taking this integer and trying to solve this piece. What is the solution? Person's like, 5. Try again. Well, I don't understand. It's 5. Well, the reason it's 3 is because of this. Okay, so now we have that. What do you think we do next? Oh, we have to factor this part. Great. How do you factor? And there's this example of this one-on-one with the AI chat going with the student. I think they're up to 425 instructors now. Last paper I read. And it's this one-on-one instruction. So what's happening here? Why do I talk about this example? Well, really what it is it's taking a concept and reasoning around it and trying to teach them in the Socratic style, right? And so if it can do that, then why can't it ask the right questions and probe and understand a person's childhood and help them with insights? The answer is you just have to train it. And so this is where some of the most powerful and incredible things that we're seeing in AI is actually coming down to what does a tuned model do? And no one wants to give away those secrets. And so when you go to Twitter and LinkedIn, you'll see, here's all the prompts. Here, download these 500 prompts, anything, prompt. But the real value is actually coming from the tuning of those AI. Now, tuning is challenging, requires data scientists, and you have to really think through things. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it is an enablement. It's an incredible enablement. And that's where we're going to start to see a lot of things, right? So I can give other examples. If anyone has, I said, well, all we've talked about is language. Well, fundamentally, if I can generate language, why can't I generate code? The answer is it can. It can generate very decent code. So you got a Replit and you can get things done for next to nothing from a coding perspective and get a first draft of a functional program from AI, right? You can go to Midjourney and get images, and images turning into videos. Like, you can get some really good stuff for next to nothing. I mean, the cost to utilize this is so low. And I think the overarching message here when it comes to AI is that the science fiction movies and books had us believing that AI was going to come in the form of a robot. Think, I age myself, the Jetsons, and think the maid who's there, who's carrying all the stuff and doing
Rosie.
the tasks for you. There you go. So it didn't come like that. Why? Because in the Jetsons, the maid would go to the microwave or go to the thing, get the food prepared for you, then give it to you. Where AI is coming is actually more in the information age. It's things like it's automating creatives. You can generate images, generate art. It's automating writing. It can generate the writing perspective. It's now starting to build, you can build business cases. You can help business scenarios. So it's really on the informational side. I think that's going to be the most disruptive part out of all of this. It's because traditionally the white collar jobs were up here and those were the things we all strive for. Well, that's what's going to get disrupted first, right? I can give you some stats on some of these exams, but the results of GPT-4, remember, GPT 3.5 is ChatGPT, and they've released GPT-4. ChatGPT, it scored in the 10th percentile in the uniform bar exam. Okay, so getting into a lot of the bar exam, 10th. GPT-4, 90th percentile. Okay, the LSAT, ChatGPT, 40th. LSAT, GPT-4, 88th. The SAT, evidence-based reading and writing, it scored 93rd percentile. And the GRE verbal, 99th percentile. Those are incredible scores, right?
Wow.
Those are phenomenal. And the jump from GPT-3 to that was just a matter of months. And so imagine what can come. Now, I do think we're going to hit the law of diminishing returns. We're going to be going there. But everyone says, oh, it's not good at math. Well, a fine-tuned version might be better, or a different model altogether.
Do you have any idea or way to explain what is happening behind the scenes? I know it's just code, right? But like between 3 to 4?
Okay, so between 3 and 4 is a very complicated thing. Let's zoom back to first between programming and AI, right? So programming follows what we call a linear set of instructions. If this, then that, right? So you have to program every scenario you can think of. And when you don't program a scenario properly, error, okay? That's software program. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, kind of what we're talking about right now, is creating and programming a model that reduces statistical error. So it creates a probability of being correct, and then you create a threshold, cutoff of what is correct. So what that means is I can feed it a bunch of data and say, okay, generate a model. Think of like a statistical line that produces the least amount of squared errors, right? Well, here's a new data point, right? Something you've never seen before. Instead of giving you an error, it's going to say, this is probabilistically this is what I think it is. And so that foundation of minimizing statistical error is really what this is all about. But the layers and layers of complexity in mathematics and the amount of volume, the amount of parameters to make this model fit is just so large now that it can generate new stuff. It was the unintended consequences of reduction of statistical error was that it can generate and predict the next stuff. Now they're layering on models that can help you with better reasoning, better computation, all that kind of stuff. And so it's just incredible.
And you have just demonstrated the depth to which you understand the subject because you're able to reiterate and teach it to others. And that's at the top of the pyramid, right?
Trust me, it's hard keeping up. I'm quoting to people that are in higher ed. Like I was just talking with ASU. I was just delivering a keynote at Auburn, and I just sent them a paper that was released 4 days ago. Right, that's how fast this is going, and that paper 4 days ago is changing our views already. So it's fun, it's crazy, and I think what Bill Gates said, this is the most important thing that's happened since the graphical user interface, which is basically going from DOS to an operating system.
Oh my goodness!
How many of those million users in 5 days do you think understand this, or maybe it's more now? Of the universe of users, how many do you think are at that? You're obviously at the top of the pyramid. You know how to use it.
Nowhere near. Guys,
in this room you are.
I'm trying to think, could a candidate actually do any of that right now unless they were very, very, very knowledgeable about this?
Okay, so I think that's the wrong way to think about it. So It's not a technical and understanding the technical implications. It's technology. Steve Jobs nailed it. Technology is all about the user. It's user experience. They shouldn't know it's AI. It should just work. They don't need to understand. So as an example, I give an example of a startup I was talking to in EdTech, and they said, practice another language as much as you want in conversations, but it's not a person, it's AI. And I'm like, no one cares. Just tell me it's on-demand practice, right? Like, I don't care that it's a robot. In fact, I trust it less. So that's the message here. The message is that this is a user experience thing. And so with the release of ChatGPT, it became an interface that the average person can work with. Whereas prior to, with GPT-2 and GPT-1 and GPT-3, it was all application programming interfaces and a playground where people who were in tech knew what was coming, were able to work with it, but it wasn't accessible to the masses. So I believe that the reason we see the advent of a very fast adoption had everything to do with its accessibility as an interface.
Right.
Now,
I've talked about becoming mainstream, and that's exactly it. It's accessible and it's to the masses.
Yeah, and so I've talked a ton. I'd love to see what Brad thinks about this perspective, AI, and brings back to education and what you think is going on here, Brad.
Hey, thanks for putting me on the spot, Gonzo.
You know me. I always
that's great.
You to grow.
Two things. First of all, I think Gonzo hit it spot on that previous to AI, we were in a very binary world, meaning You either plagiarized or you didn't, right? You missed a citation and now you plagiarized, right? I think we're moving away from that. It's a binary system. So I think we're going to have to reassess how we actually give assessments, right? So one way in which we're thinking about that now is moving towards what we call more authentic assessments. So for example, Pam, when you sit down with one of your clients and you have that one-on-one conversation, you can get very deep into their personal life, right? And who they are. Well, that's the same thing as a professor. If a student comes into my office and I start asking them questions, I can quickly gauge how well they actually understand the material, right? Whereas in some assessments, I just give them a piece of paper and they, fill out the bubbles and I just see the end outcome. I don't really know. Are they just a good test taker or do they really understand the material? So I think AI is pushing us now towards, we got to get more towards authentic assessments, but how do we do that at scale? So I think AI can actually help us with that. And Gonzo can speak a little bit about how AI and can recognize text and things like that to help us go more towards oral exams. But I think we have to find a better balance in how we assess students. And I think that's where AI can really actually help us instead of us being scared. I think it opens up new ways that we can reach authentic assessment that we never could before. So I'm pretty excited about it. We're not there yet. And this is the conversation that we're trying to have. And I think Gonzo correctly points out, it's this idea of measuring progress or where people are at and how they adapt and change that we've never been able to do well. So I'm optimistic that AI is actually going to be a beautiful thing. And hopefully that transitions into admissions, right? And how we actually gauge who people are.
I think it has to, because if it's in the business world, then universities have to start using it. And if universities start using it, admissions is going to have to start using it.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think AI, that's what I'm excited about. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would have this question for both Brad and Gonzo. How do you think MBA adcoms should now evaluate essays?
Now who's on the spot?
Brad, you go first.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I will preface that by saying I've never been in that situation where I'm evaluating the student in admissions. So I don't have a lot of insight there. But I think it goes back to what I was just saying is we have to treat that essay as one part of the puzzle, right? Or one piece of the pie. If we're weighting it too much, and we know that, students can now easily create essays that don't really represent who they are, then we have a major problem, right? So yeah, I think we've got to move towards multi assessments, right? Not just one essay but you'd have to tell me exactly what is in that essay or in the admissions process beyond just the essay. It's been so many years now since I submitted my essays to grad school. But yes, I remember thinking to myself, I would just ask myself, what does the admissions committee want to hear? And I'm going to say it. Whether or not I believed it or not, that's how I approached it.
And I would say that's the wrong approach. AI or not.
But it worked for me because I went to the schools that I wanted to go to. But so I don't have good insight into that, what they're looking for exactly.
Yeah, I always, my gut reaction is to go back to what is the objective of the admission group and what is the root first principle that they're trying to achieve. And I think that they're trying to allow the right people who are going to be successful in the program to get the most out of their program to fit their culture. I think that's what they want. And so my question,
and to get to be successful getting a job afterwards. It's not just about surviving the program, right? Yeah. It's also about the next step, the exit model.
Mm-hmm. The exit model, yeah. And so if that's the goal, I ask, is the essay the right way? And so I come back to a lot of this, and it really comes down to that root issue, which is we need to rethink assessment as a whole. And I think there are two pillars of that, right? I said one, which is the measuring the process by which a student arrives at their final result, is one piece. And I think that the second piece is the individualization of that assessment. And the reason I say the individualization is if and Brad just alluded to it earlier, if every professor had the opportunity to one-on-one orally evaluate every one of their students, they'd be pretty good at understanding of where they're at, right? So we need to scale that, the root fundamental benefits or process of that oral essay. We need to scale it. And so the question is what is it about it? And there needs to be a lot of more science and academic research and understanding of that area before we figure out how to do it. And I'll leave with this one thing. So technology does two things, and you can almost summarize every piece of technology, whether it's software or not. It either lets someone go through a process faster, or it eliminates a step in a process. And anyone who has ever tried to put technology on a bad process has had the terrible results. And so the point I'm saying is we have to make sure we understand this new process before we start just throwing technology on it.
Those insights, Gonzo. I think we're gonna have to conclude with that because we're already a little bit over the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time, also in the audience. And first of all, thank you, the three of you, so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating, and I feel like we can go on for another few more episodes about this. But maybe we'll check in with you guys. Yeah, I think we should check in with you guys, 6 months or a year from now, and see where things have progressed. If you'd like, we'd be very happy to have you guys join us again.
For sure. Would love to.
Thanks.
So,
all right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a good one.
For this amazing, fascinating
Thanks, guys.
episode.
Thank you. Bye.
guys, thanks for joining us on MBA Waves. If you like the episode, don't forget
MBA
to give us a like and be sure to subscribe just to get more information. And for the calendar of upcoming episodes, check us out at mbawaves.com. Bye-bye.